Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Colonel Tanner and Bridget. Hi, everybody. I was
Hi.
hoping before we get started, if we could go ahead and repost the space as we're opening up. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, Stellar, you need to remind us. I always forget to do that. Okay, we are going to get started with chapter 27, which is Killing Sadat. And it starts in 1981 with Ed Wilson kind of getting backed into a corner. He had been under indictment and on the run for over a year at this point. And basically, all of his maneuvers or attempts to work with the prosecutors were going nowhere. And remember that he was being indicted for the murder of Ladier, the former ambassador to Chile, even though he had nothing to do with it, because basically the CIA used their Cuban exiles to do it and set him up. So they were also investigating him for Libya's weapon cells, potentially even to include nuclear weapons, even though it didn't go through. So Shackley had put out the word through Israeli assets in Libya that the CIA was using Wilson in an assassination plot against Omar Gaddafi. According to Wilson, Casey wanted to assassinate Gaddafi. He put it into the Senate Intelligence Committee for approval, and he was just telling them that he was going to do it. Senator Goldwater was so upset and so mad that he went public and said, "Look, GD, no, this is never going to happen." Wilson said that he was awakened in his villa in Tripoli in the middle of the night. And this is a quote from him. "I swear to God, it's the absolute truth. 2:00 in the morning, I get a beating on my door. I go down to military headquarters. I knew something was really wrong. They basically stood me against the wall. In this GD room was all the people who had to do with Americans. Somebody is coming here to assassinate Gaddafi. You are CIA. You know who it is. You are here to assassinate Gaddafi. Listen, you guys, I have nothing to do with this." I talked and I talked, and finally I said, "Look, this took almost 6 hours. I finally convinced them and said, look, Senator Goldwater has made a big point about saying that this cannot go on. Gaddafi's safer today than he's ever been in his life because of this thing." So I went on and explained how the American press worked, and I went over and over it for 6 hours, and they finally let me go, unquote. On August 22nd, a top-level CIA source, because see what they were trying to do, the CIA was trying to get him killed. They wanted to accuse him of being the assassin to Gaddafi and hoping that they would drag him into some dark dungeon and beat him and kill him. And this is what the CIA does when they are ready to finish using you, is they will set you up for assassination. They've done it to their own people repeatedly. On August 22nd, a top-level CIA source sat in a meeting in Addis Ababa between Gaddafi and Ethiopian leader Colonel Mariam. During this meeting, Gaddafi stated flatly that he was going to have President Reagan assassinated. A week later, an NSA intercept picked up Gaddafi repeating his intention to have Reagan killed, but Reagan was not the president who would be assassinated. Anwar Sadat was not always a friend of America. He had been among Nasser's military officers who overthrew the king Farouk in 1952 and had been in the Nasser government when it was a, get ready for it, Soviet client state, because they threw the UK out. After Nasser's death in 1970, the plotting to replace him was intense. The KGB had effectively penetrated most Egyptian institutions. Okay, including the Egyptian Secret Service. The CIA station chief in Cairo was located in the Spanish embassy because the US and Egypt had not had diplomatic relations, since they tried to overthrow Nasser in 1967 in conjunction with Israel in the 7-Day War. When Sadat became president of Egypt, he had been vice president at the time, so he became acting president on Nasser's death. In September 1970. He was confirmed as president on October 15th, 1970. The CIA station chief, Eugene Trone, Trone, because having an embassy doesn't mean, not having an embassy doesn't mean you're not still going to get CIA. And his subordinate officer, Thomas Twitten, Twetten, both intelligence officers recruited a guy by the name as Ashraf Marwan, Marwan, and his first name is Ashraf. He was a cabinet minister at the time who sat next to Sadat at cabinet meetings. Marwan provided Twitten, the CIA guy, a wealth of information on Sadat and those who were plotting to take power away from him. Twitten sent cables back to the CIA indicating that Sadat was much more than an interim figure and much more important than Westerners originally thought, and that he was interested in peace in the Middle East. Henry Kissinger and the State Department basically ignored that because they're not interested in peace. The Mossad had warned James Angleton in April of 1971 that the Soviets were orchestrating a change in Egypt and that Sadat would be assassinated and replaced with a leader handpicked by the KGB. Twitten's job was to get this information to Sadat via Marwan. On May 11, 1971, Sadat was given the evidence of the plot against him. Within months, Egypt was no longer a Soviet client state. And let me refresh your memory here. To be determined or to be categorized as a Soviet client state, that means that you buy weapons from the Soviet Union after the West has cut you off. Kamal Adem, the chief of intel from Saudi Arabia, at that time still began personally visiting Sadat, urging him to cooperate with the Americans, because that's what all of them want, is another client state to the West, which is why they all had to get rid of everybody else. Adem made it clear to Sadat that he would have a full backing of the Saudi royal family if he would be friendly to Washington, D.C. Sadat restructured the Egyptian intelligence with the help of Shackley, and for insurance, the CIA put several of Sadat's top ministers and his vice president, Hosni Mubarak, on the CIA's payroll. Yeah, Mubarak on the CIA payroll. It was, after all, according to Crowley, Kleins, and Corson, Capucci, in the national interest of the U.S. to keep Egypt as a client state. The CIA did not tell a series of presidents that while Sadat was reaching for peace with Israel and reforms at home, his popularity, unlike Nasser's, existed only in embassies and state departments like Tel Aviv, Washington, and Riyadh. Sadat had enormous political problems at home because no one in Egypt wanted to be a client state of the United States or Britain because they had just stopped being that under Nasser. Even as his wife, whose name was Jehan, Jehan, caused him political problems with her Western ways. The Camp David Accord, signed in 1978, had made Sadat a world statesman. Once they were signed, in addition to the promise of foreign and military aid, Sadat was to receive a detailed intelligence briefing that largely dealt with regional threats to him, to keep him paranoid so he stays on the tit of the CIA. Because his life and regime was, according to the CIA, under constant threats. That is what made the training of his security force so profitable for Wilson's company, which was called J.J. Capucci and Associates. Later, William Casey would arrange to use Eatsco and its freight forwarder, R.G. Hobbleman's Shipping Company of Baltimore, to mix shipments for the Afghan resistance and Egypt. So, what the CIA is doing with their front companies is they go in and give you threat briefings, and then they recommend the company to hire, which happens to be another one of their front companies, to provide the training and security to the puppet government while U.S. aid is being sent to the country in order to get the security. So that's the money laundering. I just described to you a huge cycle of money laundering. So the CIA gets the guy they want in charge. That guy gets CIA threat briefings that says they're going to kill you any minute. So you have to have our security. We've got to do the training. We've got to ship you all of the equipment. So they go back to Congress and go, oh my God, he's going to die. So you've got to give him tons and tons of U.S. taxpayer dollars to provide military and foreign aid to his government. Then our tax dollars comes out of our wallet and goes to Washington, D.C. Then they look like they're going to Egypt, when in fact, they're going to Ed Wilson's front company, who's providing the training for the people in Egypt on a fake threat briefing. Because the only real threat to these guys were their own people, because the CIA set up their government to begin with. Do you see how that works? And then when Wilson gets the contract, he takes his cut off. The rest of the hierarchy at the CIA takes their cut off. They get kickbacks to all of the congressmen that approved the aid to begin with on fake briefings. And they're happy as a lark. And we're broke. The CIA, in effect, was allowing Egypt to get rid of its aging Soviet ammunition and technology in exchange for American equipment. The old Soviet, because that generates more money for the military-industrial complex. The old Soviet and Eastern Bloc war material was sent to the Afghan rebels as Egyptian aid via Saudi Arabia and Iraq. And that's what... So at the same time we're doing all of this, we're also giving military aid to Afghanistan. And that was to buy new weapons for them as well. But they didn't get new weapons. They got kickbacks into Egypt to buy the Soviet equipment that they had bought, because Nasser wasn't allowed to buy Western equipment because they cut him off because they didn't like him because he was a popular president and kicked the British out. Isn't life grand? Okay. The arrangement went through, who else? Kamal Adem, the chief of intel of Saudi Arabia, because he's controlling all of this. He had set up shipment and used who to finance all of this? One guess. BCCI, the CIA front bank, because they're all going to get a cut too. The connections between Eatsco, BCCI, Casey, and Sadat were just beginning of the massive amount of aid that would go to Egypt and the Afghan resistance, quote unquote resistance. According to Crowley, Klein's, Corson, two of the secret Eatsco's partners were at the forefront of the Mujahideen effort getting their cut. That happens to be Richard Secord and von Marbach, weapons traffickers extraordinaire. Orchestrating much of what was going on in Egypt was a CIA agent by the name of William Buckley, one of Shackley's oldest and dearest friends. Operating out of the Cairo station, Buckley supervised a vast array of spies within Sadat's regime. In 1980, Buckley was put in charge of the training of Sadat's personal bodyguards after the CIA took over the contract from J.J. Capucci and Associates. The CIA had assumed the training of Sadat's security forces because it felt that the publicity Wilson was receiving would damage their relations inside of Egypt if Sadat was to discover that Wilson actually owned the J.J. Capucci company. Neil Livingstone, who by this time was involved in the J.J. Capucci operation, quote, "We did the training of Sadat's Praetorian Guard to protect Sadat." No, they did it to spy. And then the contract was taken away from us and given to the agency, and he got killed. We never would have permitted that kind of security lapse. It's evident that they wanted Sadat dead. That's a quote from Livingstone. To Livingstone, what Buckley and the CIA offered Sadat was amateur night compared to Ed Wilson's company. All Capucci did was this kind of executive protection. That was his bread and butter. The CIA had more political considerations than they did. Well, the CIA is going to take over the contract whenever the CIA wants to get rid of somebody. On October 6, 1981, National and Victory Day in Egypt, they held their annual military parade. Sadat was dressed in his general uniform. At the moment of the assassination, it was immediately obvious that the assassins had the cooperation of Sadat's CIA-trained security force. No one attempted to protect the president. Members of his own army lifted their rifles and shot him again and again. The reviewing stand was a sea of blood. The CIA Operations Center in Langley received a flash report from the Cairo station mid-morning. Anwar Sadat has been shot and wounded while reviewing a military parade. But the Cairo station report was hopelessly behind the television networks, who were reporting that he was dead. Casey expected howls of protest from Sadat's successor, Mubarak. As Bob Woodward later wrote, Casey and Inman worried that the new Egyptian government of Sadat's protege, Mubarak, would lodge a strenuous protest because they all knew it was the CIA that had trained Sadat's bodyguards. But there was nothing, not even a mild complaint. The truth of the matter was that there would be no protests from Mubarak because Mubarak was involved in Eatsco, the CIA front company. And many of the men who controlled Eatsco had also controlled the training of Sadat's bodyguards. An investigation might have resulted in the Egyptian public finding out that their martyred president had ordered an investigation of top associates of his replacement. And from the U.S.'s standpoint, such a probe would have revealed what Eatsco really was, so he had to go. So at the end, Sadat had figured out that he was being set up and ordered an investigation, which means he had to go. When Camp David Accords were signed, with President Carter's promise of billions of dollars in military aid, an Egyptian named Hussein Salam headed a company called Tersam, Tersam, the company that Egypt designated as the sole shipping agency for all military hardware coming from the United States. When Salem, Salem, went to see von Marbach at the Pentagon to get his company accredited as a shipping agent, von Marbach refused to certify it unless there was an American participating in the company. Von Marbach was close to Egyptian's military attaché in Washington, a Major General Abu Ghazala, Ghazala, as well as Mubarak. Through Ghazala, von Marbach suggested to Salem that Tom Clines would be an acceptable American partner in his company. Salem proposed that Klein control 49% of the shipping contract through Eatsco, with Tursam controlling the 51%. In 1981, Sadat's staff undertook an audit of the Tursam Eatsco shipping invoices and discovered a serious overcharge and misuse of funds. When Sadat learned of the tens of millions of dollars in shipping overcharges, he initiated an investigation, which revealed that Mubarak was, for all practical purposes, a secret partner in the operation, getting kickbacks. This investigation became a threat not only to Mubarak and Eatsco, but the entire effort and the arms being shipped to the Afghan resistance, which were not new arms, which is what Congress authorized, but Soviet relics out of the trash pile in Egypt. So if that word got out, the American taxpayers and Congress would have known they're getting scammed, because these guys are taking the money off the top by buying pennies on the dollar, this Soviet hardware, but at the same time buying real equipment and black marketing it instead of giving it to the Afghan resistance. Sadat's assassination effectively ended the investigation. General Ghazala, von Marbach's good friend, had been the Egyptian military liaison to J.J. Kapushi and later the CIA for the training of Sadat's personal bodyguards. After Sadat's murder, Mubarak called Abu Ghazala back from Washington and named him the Minister of Defense. Abu Ghazala would play a huge role in the anti-Soviet effort inside of Afghanistan. In addition to shipping millions of U.S. arms aid through Pakistan to the Afghan resistance, it allowed Egypt to make millions of dollars on the military aid, and the general made a fortune for Egypt by brokering mules to Pakistan for use in Afghanistan. It was Ghazala's own weapon salesman, a guy by the name of General Yahi al-Gamal, Gamal, who arranged for a contract for 2,500 mules at $1,300 each. That's a gold mine for mules. According to the CIA officer, Gus Avrakotos, and I'm going to spell his last name, Avrakotos, you have to realize that donkeys and mules are the lowest form of life in Egypt. Even a camel has higher status, but the Egyptians provided each donkey with an ID card and a vaccination certificate. According to Charlie Wilson's War, it was not enough for the general to make fun of the Pakistanis. He also had General Yahya outfit every donkey with a piece of plastic sporting an Arabic name. He thought it was hysterical. He even gave them passports. They told the Pakistanis only reluctantly accepted this credentialed herd. They were sufficiently insulted that they refused to permit any Egyptian mules inside of Pakistan again. The CIA's experience of buying and shipping mules to Afghanistan over the next few years became the subject of legendary stories in the halls of Langley. At one point, the Pakistanis became so irritated that they wouldn't permit the CIA's transporters to leave the mule manure in Pakistan. They made the planes carry the smelly droppings back to Europe with them. The connections were clear enough. Through Israeli intelligence sources in Libya, the CIA had the memo Ed Wilson had written to Gaddafi's military security on May 12, 1981, detailing his activities in Egypt through EATSCO. In that memo, Wilson was very direct about how high up the connections were. Quote, Kleins traveled monthly to Egypt. He had met with Sadat on several occasions, and from my conversations with him, has a partner who is a member of Sadat's intelligence, as well as being Sadat's bagman, unquote. Wilson then went on to say that for a substantial retainer, he might be able to persuade his colleagues at EATSCO to supply intelligence to Libya. Wilson, of course, was relying on what Kleins had told him, who's trying to set him up. The NSA was also intercepting cable traffic from Mubarak's men, including Hussein Salam, who had gone right from a job in Egyptian intelligence into the Tursam EATSCO joint venture. But the direct link to Mubarak was his brother-in-law, whose name was Marwar Sabet, S-A-B-E-T. He was the chief of the Egyptians' military procurement. Had the NSA traffic been examined closely, it would have revealed that the real force behind Tursam was not Hussein Salam, but a Pakistani arms broker. The cable traffic would have demonstrated that the dealer was involved in money transfers with BCCI. The same man was also used by Casey to supply munitions to the Afghan resistance. Due to the corruption at EATSCO, Mubarak was at risk of being blackmailed and manipulated by any intelligence service that had photographs of him on his visits to America with Klein and Briel and with other principals at EATSCO. And that would be just about all Western intelligence. The KGB, Mossad, Saudi, and others all knew about the business arrangements. The fact that Shackley was working with the Israelis and had detailed knowledge of EATSCO gave the Israelis a stranglehold on Egypt. And the ultimate irony is that in the end, the fundamentalist radicals who were blamed for killing Sadat had accomplished less than nothing for their cause. Mubarak's government orchestrated the most severe crackdown on Muslim fundamentalism since the expulsion of the Muslim Brotherhood. General Caprusi himself had all but disappeared from Washington's scene as he fought the toughest battle of his life, cancer. What remained for Caprusi was a realization that his name had been used in conjunction with the assassination. Wilson said Caprusi feared that Israeli intelligence had bugged Wilson's Washington townhouse. Caprusi, in an interview a year before he died, said, quote, "It is true. Look, Wilson's friends at the CIA were up to their necks with the Israelis, especially Shackley. I had the place swept repeatedly, and repeatedly bugs would turn up. My fear was that the Israelis would get someone in the personal guard and recruit them to spy on Sadat. I never thought they would try to kill him," unquote. Caprusi agreed that Israel had no motive, but Mubarak did. Sadat found out that Mubarak's connection and corruption in EATSCO when he ordered his own investigation. Through his connections to EATSCO, Mubarak had access to all security procedures and the CIA, including the access list to the officers and who was trained to do what. So that's crazy. And there is another assassination thanks to the CIA. So next is luring Wilson home, because we got to get him home. Now that we've got everybody over there kind of out that knows and has dealt with him, we got to get him home. Speaking for the CIA, of course. In the aftermath of the assassination of President Anwar Sadat, it was imperative for Shackley to get Ed Wilson into U.S. custody before he started running his mouth. Unless Wilson could be quickly discredited by arrest and a trial, he was a big threat to the new government in Egypt. Wilson was isolated from his family. He was drinking more and more. Despite it all, the reality that the rogue had abandoned him was impossible for Wilson to accept. He had always believed that both Shackley and Klein and everybody else was part of his group. The effort to get Wilson discredited was well underway before the Sadat murder. The cleansing of his CIA files had begun. The day before Sadat was murdered, Army intelligence filed a report with headquarters quoting a top Egyptian official as stating that the high-ranking Egyptians, including General Hassan Ali and Abdul Ghazala, had personal business dealings with Itzko. The memorandum, written by a guy by the name of Keith Leinauer, Leinauer, went on to state that his sources believed that a conspiracy was being formed against Sadat to eliminate him from power. The memorandum gave complete details of the history of Itzko and its American and Egyptian partners. So on October 27, 1981, 21 days after Sadat was assassinated, the FBI opened an investigation into Itzko. For Israelis' intelligence, the aftermath of Sadat's death left some problems. The first was that Wilson, now a very angry fugitive, could link Itzko to Ted Shackley and to Israel, because Ted Shackley is their guy. If a serious investigation got underway, it was only a matter of time before the secret partnership behind Itzko would be exposed, as well as its links to the training of Sadat's security forces, its association with Israel, blah, blah, blah. That would also lead to Ari Ben Menashe, who was the controversial Israeli agent in place in Tehran during this same period, who was getting all of the Israeli weapons being sent into, hold on, let me go find Bridget. I think she just got knocked off. There we go. So again, Israel's in the thick of this. So the Israeli contact that was basically doing all of this in Tehran was the Sadat was killed by Americans to stop his investigation into Itzko, which would have exposed our man, meaning the Israeli man, Shackley, as well as the Americans involved in Itzko. According to the Israeli agent, the instructions the Israelis gave to Shackley were clear: find a way to get Wilson out of the way. Just now, how important the arrest of Wilson became startlingly clear when one realizes that they used no less than the CIA, the Justice Department, Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, Richard Allen, the president's national security advisor, and America's premier investigator, Seymour Hersh, all to get Wilson. The operation began when the assistant U.S. attorney, Eugene Propper, Propper, who had worked with Larry Barcella on the Wilson and Lautier case, resigned for a more profitable career in private practice. Propper was a tall, easygoing man who had made his reputation solving the Lattier case. Books about Proper, Barcella, and FBI agent Carter Cornick had painted the three men as heroes. Shackley counted on Barcella to nail Wilson. Now, Barcella would get a little help from his old colleague. One of the most bizarre events of the entire Wilson case is a meeting at the White House on the evening of July 8th, 1981, 3 months before Sadat's assassination. In attendance were Kevin Mulcahy, Mulcahy, who was an alcoholic, unstable CIA man who had worked for Wilson in Libya. Investigative reporter Seymour Hersh, who had written about Mulcahy's exploits, and a mysterious guest they brought in with them by the name of Ernest Kaiser. Greeting the visitors were National Security Advisor Richard Allen, and prosecutor Barcella. Kaiser assured those gathered that he had a way of bringing Wilson to justice. Kaiser said that his long CIA experience had brought him into contact with Wilson before, and because of that, Wilson might believe that an overture from Kaiser to bring Wilson out from the cold would be real. Kaiser then provided a resume, which the Justice Department had failed to verify. According to the CIA memo, Kaiser's resume is a, quote, imaginative piece of fiction. The purpose would appear to be to bail himself out of legal problems. The agency files were all no record except in the DO area, unquote. Several lines of the memo have now been deleted, but what is made clear in the memo is that Kaiser had a relationship with Shackley and Klein. According to Bob Crowley and a Shackley subordinate who asked not to be identified, Kaiser had been used by Shackley as a contract agent in Europe. The fact that Kaiser had conned the National Security Advisor Richard Allen and the deputy director of the CIA, Bobby Ray Inman, and a top flight investigator like Seymour Hersh into believing that he simply wanted to see Wilson brought to justice was a testament to his intelligence acting skills. Kaiser had operated under a number of aliases, including August R. von Kaiser, another one, Ernest Rezek, another one, Uno Freese, Freese, Jacob Shermansky, and Ernesto Robert Kaiser. Most of his work had been out of Munich, Germany. He had first come in contact with Shackley and Klein in the 1950s, helping the U.S. government in their post-war Nazi recruitment. In fact, Kaiser was in New York born, but had been raised in Germany and in Brazil. As a young man, he had returned to Germany as an intelligence agent. In 1946, he was arrested by the Allied forces in Austria for fraud. And keep in mind, Austria is where Otto Skorzeny went to hang out after the war. And a whole bunch of the other CIA recruited Nazis were all found in Austria. That's weird. That keeps coming up. According to Berlin-based veteran John Sherwood, Shackley and Kaiser met at the Berlin operating base. That was the Bob, where Kaiser played a role in running the rat line, secretly exporting Nazis both to the U.S. and South America. Over the next 30 years, Kaiser had been known as an international con man. By 1981, he was involved in the biggest scheme ever, a plan to sell 520,000 timeshare units in, oh my God, I forgot about this, in a condominium complex in Polk County, Florida, which of course is where I live. I forgot that was even in there. That would have earned him $500 million. Under Florida law, none of that money was required to be put in escrow during construction. For Kaiser, who had already been on the Interpol's wanted list, that was a real opportunity. Just when Shackley contacted Kaiser about the Wilson matter is open to question. What is known is that in the spring of 1981, Kaiser contacted Seymour Hersh and Kevin Mulcahy about bringing Wilson back. This was about the same time that the New York Times Magazine published two major Hersh articles about Wilson. Hersh set up the meeting with Richard Allen, the president's lawyer, Fred Fielding, and a New York City attorney, Robert Schwartz. Kaiser had used the Pulitzer-winning Hearst to get him into contact with top-level American power. According to Wilson's lawyers in Hearst, Kaiser said he wanted to know one thing before he agreed to lure Wilson back. He asked if Wilson was not a deep cover asset cut loose by his government. What Kaiser was doing for Shackley was determining how good a job the rogues had done at isolating Wilson from the upper echelons of the government. Allen demonstrated just how well they had done this when he said that he would have to check with Admiral Inman, who was very familiar with the Wilson case. The timing was remarkable. Barcella, along with the new administration, was at his wits' end in trying to decide what to do about Wilson. The FBI had already refused Barcella's request to entrap Wilson and return him to the United States. Then, on July 8th, there was a meeting that resulted in Barcella's enlisting Proper, who was one of Kaiser's attorneys, to deal with Kaiser. In conversations with Kaiser, Proper began to get the impression that Kaiser was no ordinary client and that he might be the answer to catching Wilson. Barcella was becoming more and more politically involved in the new administration when several original prosecutors in the Lattier case had been thrown out. A key government witness described Barcella's retrial efforts as half-hearted. The witness was Ricardo Cantante, Canete, who was a founding member of the Cuban anti-Castro group, or Cuban exiles, or Operation Gladio people, whatever you want to call it. Larry wanted to become a big shot in the Reagan and Bush administration, so he took a dive the second time around, Cantante said. It was clear the administration felt indebted to the right-wing Cuban community where the Lattier convictions were a real sore spot. Richard Peterson, the Treasury agent assigned to Wilson's case, said that Barcella, whom he greatly admired, tended to fall in love with the intelligence types. At about the same time, Bill Casey was given a report confirming that the men around Sadat were up to their collective necks with Klein, Shackley, Secord, von Marbach, and Wilson. Really not Wilson, but all of the rest of them. For Casey, none of it mattered. Klein, Shackley, Secord, and von Marbach were all playing a major role in the Iranian initiative that had begun with the October surprise in the 1980 campaign, and you couldn't piss any of them off because they would rat out the fact that they were on Reagan's October surprise detail. Casey had no real interest in seeing Wilson arrested or brought to justice. In his view, all Wilson was capable of doing was embarrassing the rest of them. But Casey's deputy, Bobby Ray Inman, had a different perspective because they kept him out of the loop. Each day, he realized more fully that Casey was a cowboy who was going outside his channels of operation. As far as Inman was concerned, bringing in Wilson might take care of a lot of business. Barcella, unable to get the FBI to cooperate with him, succeeded in getting permission through the White House to use Kaiser to get Wilson back in the States. The CIA had warned Barsala that Kaiser had faked his background. The colleagues in the Department of Justice had warned him that Kaiser had been arrested 10 times overseas and twice inside the United States. In other words, he's a crook. Regardless, the Justice Department hired Kaiser to go get Wilson. Not the CIA, the Justice Department. All of Kaiser's calls to Wilson and subsequent meetings were monitored. Between August 81 and June 82, Kaiser worked his way into Wilson's world. He played Wilson with great expertise. He told Wilson what a terrific Florida real estate venture he had. Wilson was so impressed with Kaiser that he lent him $425,000 for the Florida condo scheme. Through many phone calls, all directed by Barsala and recorded by the government, Kaiser and another sometimes CIA agent, Daniel Drake, convinced Wilson that Richard Allen wanted to make a deal with him. Drake visited Wilson twice in Libya. On one of the visits, he showed Wilson a letter from the National Security Council authorizing Kaiser to negotiate for the Justice Department who had hired him. John Keats, one of Wilson's Washington lawyers, says that throughout this process, he repeatedly warned Wilson that he believed Kaiser and Drake were frauds. What Kaiser claimed to Keats is he represented the National Security Council. Keats suggested they all get in a cab and go over to the old executive building. But every time he did that, Kaiser made excuses. Despite these and other warnings, Wilson was certain Kaiser was real. Wilson came. How's he even a CIA cutout? Sorry. Wilson came to the conclusion that because Kleins had assured him that Kaiser was legit, Wilson was unable to face the possibility that they were now setting him up. The scheme that Kaiser used to convince Wilson that the U.S. wanted to make a deal with him was similar to the Shackley, Klein, Secord, and von Marbach had done with Wilson and Eatzko. Wilson was to be allowed to set up a front company in the Dominican Republic for the CIA and NSA. Wilson would be allowed to stay in the Caribbean and operate for a few years, and then he would be permitted to come home. Again, just notice this is a pattern with the way these guys write this book. Every time they mention the CIA, they have to tack on a Department of Defense intelligence appended, like the NSA. It's never, in any of this book so far, they never talk about just the CIA doing anything. That's wrong. It's the CIA and somebody else. Without Klein, and I don't know whether it's true or not, I just think it's hilarious because in some cases, on this particular one, in some cases, it's absolutely not true. And I've found other coordinating where they have tried this before. So that's a pattern. Without Klein's assurances and Wilson's knowledge that Kaiser had been part of the early Shackley operations, Wilson claims he would have never believed Kaiser's story. At any rate, the reality of what he faced came home to Wilson as immigration officers in the Dominican Republic refused to let him get off the plane and instead forced him onto a flight bound for New York. In June, and by the way, again, the Dominican Republic under the control of the CIA. Wilson was taken into custody at JFK International Airport. The successful end of Larry Barsala's hunt for Wilson had been celebrated by reporters and Barsala as a great victory for U.S. justice. But the story that a brilliant Barsala outsmarted a dumb Wilson did not quite describe what happened. Kaiser, like Wilson, was an expert swindler and con man. That is what he did for the U.S. government. Larry Barsala found himself having to explain to other angry prosecutors why Kaiser had been allowed to defraud American citizens out of millions of dollars in a Florida condominium scheme by taking investors' money and making off with it. Barsala actually approached one of Kaiser's land scam victims, J.D. Brogner, and asked him to take no action on the $60,000 Kaiser had stolen from him. Barsala also talked with other investors and were trying to talk them out of prosecuting Kaiser so it didn't jeopardize their case that they were going to build against Wilson. This meant that when Kaiser filed for bankruptcy, those investors were screwed because they hadn't already taken action. That's your effing government. In July 1984, Kaiser was arrested in Florida for attempting to extort $500,000 from a Tampa banker. Kaiser had assured the banker that he was operating on behalf of the Justice Department. Unfortunately for Kaiser, the FBI had persuaded the banker to wear a wire, and Kaiser was taken into custody. A week later, Barsala filed a sworn affidavit calling for Kaiser's release on bail. Barsala, the guy that's prosecuting Wilson and wants to use Kaiser, is interfering in a Florida investigation for Kaiser. On December 2nd, the day before Kaiser was to go to trial, Kaiser arranged for Daniel Drake to give him a superficial bullet wound. He implied to reporters that Wilson, who had been convicted in New York of trying to arrange paid murders of witnesses against him, had arranged for the attempted murder of himself. The court date was pushed off until February 5th, 1985. But thanks to Barsala's getting Kaiser released on bail, Kaiser was able to flee to West Germany with his wife. Kaiser would, in the coming years, sell the U.S. government false information about hostages in Lebanon and get involved in a series of other criminal acts. Extradition was denied by West German authorities because Kaiser had once been a member of the BND, General Galen's intelligence operation that is the cousin of the CIA. Wilson's arrest did not solve all the rogues' problems, but it bought them enough time to become deeply involved with Bush and Casey's operation. For all of his faults, Wilson knew how to move material. Klein's and his East Go partners did not. They had little understanding of how the freight business worked, how customs regulations worked, or Federal Maritime Authority. Klein and his associates would get very careless after they finally put Wilson away, which ultimately screwed them. So, is that crazy crap? Oh, where'd Bridget go? Oh, there she is. She must be having trouble. Get back up here, girl.
I see Cousin It down there too. She needs to get up here as well.
Yeah, so
Crazy.
Is it kicking you out, Bridget?
Well, I was on my way home.
Oh.
I was up visiting my dad today for his birthday. Had to bring him a big birthday cake and, lots of goodies. And was trying to kind of do it on my way home. And when my Wi-Fi kicks in, apparently it kicks me right on out.
Got it. All right.
But I was able to hear 98% of everything. And it's just crazy. They're just sickening, Anybody who ever thinks that in any way the CIA was ever honorable or noble, all they need to do is sit in on one of these spaces just one time, and they will get a real awakening. My opinion.
Well, and by the way, the William Buckley that we were mentioning in there, they kill him.
Well, yeah, because there's no honor among thieves.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're expendable. They're all expendable, and I think it appears Zelensky might be waking up to a little of this. He could use a little bit of the Operation Gladio knowledge to make better informed decisions.
Well, unfortunately, though, like Wilson, they believe up until the last minute that they're the exception to the rule, right? They do that, and they know they do it, but they're going to do it to everybody else but that guy. They're never going to be that guy. When any single one of them can be that guy, because they're working for an international syndicate that don't give a crap about any of them.
Absolutely.
Here's a funny thing, Colonel. I'm looking at this, and Wilson spent 22 years in jail over all of this.
Yep.
Only to have the sentence vacated.
Yeah.
And the news will only cover, generally, the getting them thrown in prison. The vacating them will get onto the back page.
Yeah. Section F, page 10.
Right. A tiny little note.
Correct.
In the classified section.
And that actually, yeah, the classified section. I caught that, Stellar. And unfortunately, that happens a lot, both on the good side and the bad side. So what'll happen is they will convict, like some of those Cuban exiles in Miami who were doing really, no kidding, like blowing people up in their houses, car bombs, all this other crap in Miami, not in some foreign country. They, and the money launderers, they would get tried and they would get sentenced because that was all front page news. And then 12 months later, while they were out on bail, all of the charges get dropped. And again, that's on the back page. So
just like they did with Trump. I mean, look at how many times there was the conviction. They were guaranteed Adam Schiff would get front center page. And then when the charges are dropped, barely mentioned.
Yeah. But it's very interesting. Excuse me. It's very interesting now going back and looking at several of them, because a lot of these books were written in the 80s. And so a lot of the cases had not been adjudicated out to the point where the charges end up getting dropped or thrown out or a reinvestigation occurs. And so in many cases, I went and looked at the final disposition of these cases, how long, if any, time they spent in jail. And in so many cases, the really, no kidding, bad guys would have charges dropped because, again, the CIA gets involved. Oh, you can't do that because it's national security, or they get a conviction and then there's some little fake evidence that shows up and it gets overturned. Or in the case of the legitimate, not even Wilson kind of guys, but people they frame to take the fall for something, those people will get the book slammed at them. And, maybe after 20 years they get released. Maybe.
Do you think Nuremberg was the dry run for that? Because they did that so many times in that particular case.
Well, no, I wouldn't say so, because the one judge that they had over there and two of the lead trial counsels were all from the same town in Texas. And to me, the entire Nuremberg was scripted. And I think they decided well in advance who was going to hang and who was not going to hang and be basically rat-lined out of there. And people that, no kidding, should have be hung, like Otto Skorzeny, in training the Stasi and the Bandera and Stetsko kind of quality people, No way should he have ever been allowed to remain alive as war crimes, because he was the orchestrator, trainer of all of that shit. And yet, because of his capabilities and their desire to be able to replicate those types of things in the future on behalf of themselves, basically he was given a false identity. He was literally put into Austria to hang out after he got out of the quote unquote Hilton Hotel version of a quote unquote camp. He went through the trial thing. And then he was given a fake identity and whisked away into Paris, and supposedly just escaped out of a prison, which never happened. And when someone noticed the scar on his face in Paris, as you remember during our Scorzini paper book review, they whisked him down to Franco, Spain, where he could live free and clear, helped him set up, like we helped him set up a construction company, and then paid him through Air Force contracts to build US bases throughout the entire country of Spain, while he skimmed money off of the taxpayers in doing so. So I think the whole Nuremberg was a scripted event, just like, by the way, the counterpart to it in Japan. The entire thing was scripted, because there's no way that Kudamo and what is the other guy's Yoka Kashiwa, or whatever, however you say his name, the ones that end up setting up the World Anti-Communist League and terror training camps all over the world, those guys were war criminals. There's no way under God's green earth that they should have ever survived a war crimes court. And yet they did, because they became very useful to General MacArthur, who then goes to Korea and basically tries to create a new home for Chiang Kai-shek there. So, anybody else have questions? Miles, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with those books, but Raven Rock. Next time you talk to John Hurrell, could you ask him to read that book?
Which book?
Raven Rock.
Okay.
Because it's devolution, before devolution.
Okay. I will do that. SR71, go ahead. And then Trump Frog, you can go.
Thank you, Colonel. I was just wondering, when you were talking about all of the communications being intercepted and what was going on at that point in time, obviously there's Operation Fairview, right? I'm pretty sure you've heard of it.
Yeah.
Is Fairview an offshoot of what they were doing, or are they one and the same?
Oh, I don't know. I probably could make an argument either way. I'd have to go back. I have a book out in my cottage that talks about that in some length. I'd have to go back and review it. That's a good question. Let me also, and I meant to say this while we were talking about this. Egypt, by the way, was one of the countries, so was Iran, that had crypto AG. So everything that was going on inside of Egypt with the cabling during the peace accords, all of that information during that entire time was being read by the CIA. And what I find interesting, even in a book like this, is no one ever mentions crypto AG. The crypto AG system gave the CIA and the German BND, which is why it's kind of ironic that the guy ends up in Germany with all the Nazis still. And the West German government will not extradite him to the United States. Just keep that in mind. Just like we would not extradite Marcinkus, the Vatican banker that money laundered all of the money for Operation Gladio, we would not extradite him with an open arrest warrant to the country of Italy. They do this all the time. That extradition thing is bullshit. If they want you to go, you go. If they don't want you to go, you don't. That's the bottom line. But Crypto AG would have allowed the US government, namely the CIA, to know every single thing that was going on inside of Egypt. And they probably were very aware that Sadat had caught on to them, and that's the reason why they gave the kill notice. Trump Frog?
Hey, what's up, Colonel? Great space. So I have a question. I'm sure a lot of people have seen Charlie Wilson's War.
Mm-hmm.
How accurate do you think that book is versus all the sauce that you just threw on the noodles in this room today?
Enough to make it interesting. You know, it's really very interesting. So one of the things, and I just mentioned this, it's funny that you asked that question, that a lot of books are written to be 100% accurate, but they're written as fiction because they can't write them as nonfiction because the CIA won't let you write them.
Right.
So it can be as accurate as every single thing is 100% accurate. And as long as it has the word fiction on it, it's fine. And I've read several books that are labeled as fiction and they 100% not a thing in them is fictional. It is all, as a matter of fact, I was looking one up yesterday, and in the Wikipedia page, it goes down to the bottom and it actually tells you who the fictional character is and who the real person was. So the entire book is real. And even Wikipedia is telling you, hey, the CIA director guy, the president guy, and all of this, and here's who the real people were. So
they're just laying it out saying, here you go, these are the actual people, but everything would line up with what you're saying.
Yes.
Charlie Wilson's War is a pretty good movie.
Yeah. And so what's interesting about that, what's the word? The psyop in doing that is when they say that it's fiction and you go to the movies and you watch this on the screen, you're imprinting in your brain that none of this is real. It's all a movie. So when you hear stuff on the news or in a quote unquote conspiracy theory, your brain's already predictively programmed to say, that's fiction. That can't be true. They put that shit in movies that are fake. And that's the reason why they do it.
And the karmic retribution is they have to tell you what they're doing. So that's their way of getting around it, is my assumption.
Yeah. Good point. Miles?
Colonel, my question for you is, we know that throughout history, we've been trying to break codes and understand what the enemy's doing. Now, I'm pretty sure in World War II, the Enigma machine, we broke certain codes. So when you're talking about Crypto AG, why can't we talk about that? Why can't, when we do a story, that we can talk about, what really happened with the USS Liberty? Why can't Candace Owens talk about Crypto AG?
Well, first of all, no one knows about it. I ran across that in a book. I've only ran across it one time in 72 books. One time. And we did the research on Crypto AG back to the guy that invented it. And if you go back to the origins of it, the Swedish guy that went to, the US and basically allowed the NSA to use that material and the equipment, I should say, not material. And then the CIA, when it was created after the war, because this was before World War II, it's been around for a very long time. Hold on just a second. I may have to run if my last piece of my bookcase, I just saw the FedEx guy come down to my driveway. So if
Colonel, was the USS Liberty using crypto AG on the ship?
so, not per se. So crypto AG is, they were actually using the satellite capability from Pine Gap. If you go back and you look, and that's something else that no one talks about, that I found in looking at when Pine Gap was stood up, when the CIA began building it, because again, Pine Gap was originally built as a military base. It was not until Whittam figured out that it was not a military base, which they couped him, which was the Australian Prime Minister. He found out that it was a CIA base. It wasn't an NSA base, it was a CIA base. Okay. All right, hold on.
Pentagon.
All right, I'm back. Okay, so the Liberty, let's deal with that first, and then we'll go back to crypto AG. The Liberty is a mobile version of what they had stationary in San Vito when I was stationed there, called the Elephant Cage. It is a eavesdropping reconnaissance platform for them to pick up signal intelligence. What they were doing at the time, because they were trying to transition from stationary signal intelligence, like they had at Heraklion and San Vito and some in England and a few other places, to the mobile capability. And then we eventually get to the round white balls that sit on military bases, which are satellite tracking. So they were using Liberty to do a whole bunch of different things, one of which was perfecting GPS, because there was also a GPS tracking station at Pine Gap, and they were, because it was mobile, they could actually begin refining the technology to give us GPS, Navstar, and the satellites that then got launched to deal with that. And so what Liberty was doing was a whole bunch of different things. And so their mobile SIGINT capability with translators on the ship, that as the information, the intelligence comes into the ship, they transcribe it in a teletype kind of capability that then transmits it to the stations that are upstream of them, to include, NSA and the rest of them, DIA, CIA, blah, blah, blah. And so they are in real time off the coast of Israel, intercepting both Egyptian and Israeli transmissions. And they had both Arabic and Yiddish, or whatever the Israeli, they had the ability in real time, as calls came over on the aircraft, as it's coming in, to translate that material and send it out. One of the communications had to do with Israel asking or getting direction, probably not asking permission, to assassinate prisoners that they already had handcuffed, that they executed and buried in that El Asad, however you say it, coastal city that was just found like in 2020, their mass grave. So they were picking up in real time transmissions in a combat capability, not necessarily State Department cables, and that's crypto AG. So crypto is kind of the executive communication, and Liberty is the boots on the ground communication. Like they pick up everything, any transmissions at all that are signal intelligence. The Liberty, with the technology that they had at the time, which was state of the art, could pick up and hear any scenarios going on in Egypt and Israel based on where they were at and the course that they were cruising along the coast. So they had very compromising information, which is why Israel surveilled for hours, almost an entire day, to find out the origin, and they had equipment to find out the origins of the signal intelligence people, where the signals were generating from. And that's why they aimed the first torpedo to take them all out. So they were all dead. All of the people that were the translators, I think one guy that had that mission happened to be out of the belly of the ship. And if I'm not mistaken, but he was not down there. I don't think he was on duty at that particular time. So he would not have heard any of the transmissions that they were receiving. So anyway, that's the USS Liberty answer to that question. Crypto AG was, and let's just use this term, this is not what it is, but I'm doing this hypothetically. It's a black box that sits in the State Department. That black box is an encryption device that you could literally feed information in, like cables or memos, whatever you in governments. When you send a message, it's called a cable. And basically, and I'm just totally making this up, but I want you guys to understand, it's like faxing something. If you typed a memo and you put it in this machine, it sucks the information in and it spits it out at the other end of an encrypted device that sits in an embassy around the world. So if I'm Egypt and I have 75 embassies, there's a little black box sitting in every one of the embassies. And so I stick a paper in, it encrypts the message, and it spits it out on the other end for the other people to be able to see. So in Crypto AG was a end-to-end capability for a State Department level person to be able to communicate to all of their embassies around the world in an encrypted environment. The problem was that there was backdoors written into both crypto, into the version of Crypto AG that both the BND in West Germany and the United States CIA had access to. So they had all communications going to and from 120 countries that eventually bought Crypto AG, not knowing there was a back door to it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. You know why? This weird story. 1985, my dad worked at Control Data, and they had a program where they wanted entrepreneurs and they would finance them. And he was looking like, what is going on here as far as I could do something? And it was a black box. It was a translator box where, let's say, a big company would, year 5, they would buy like computers from IBM. And then year 8, they got a better deal and they bought them from Control Data. Well, they were on different floors, right? They couldn't talk to each other. So there was one company that was making a translator box. And my dad said, oh, I'll be the next company to do it. And he did. He started his own company. He got people that were not happy with that company that they were working with the black boxes, and he did quite well with that. So I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And so the ability for the CIA to know all of the internal workings of Sadat as they're getting ready to execute him is very important. And the same way where you had Iran in the overthrow of Mossadegh, you have the ability to know everything that they're communicating, where they're going to be, schedules, all kinds of intelligence that is, obviously they, and by the way, when after World War II, the guy had been living in the United States, and the CIA worked with him, moved him to Switzerland. And as they operated the company, because they knew that people would think it's quote unquote neutral, because he was sitting in Switzerland. And so he had salesmen who went all over the world and sold it to 120 countries. None of those salesmen knew that they were selling compromised equipment. And the as the guy got older, and he actually owned the company, the CIA and the BND were paying him. And so when he got old, they began talking amongst themselves and said, you know what? His son, who also works at the company, doesn't like us as much as his dad, and he doesn't know about the back door. And he may change the coding without us knowing about it, and then we wouldn't have our back door anymore. So before the old man dies, let's buy the company from the old man. So they used a front company, and that front company got like less than 10%, somewhere in the 10% range of equity in the company. And the other 90% was split between the BND and the CIA, because it was actually making money. Because once you bought it, you had to basically lease it in order for them to keep up the security and all that other stuff and update the encryption. And so it was a moneymaker. It made millions of dollars. It was like an Edwin Wilson company. And so they paid, like the money laundering things, they paid them a 10%. You just pretend to own this company. And then we're going to make sure that our guys are the programmers. And in the story that I read about the company, there was one guy that realized what was going on and he quit. He tried to fix the code because he saw that there was an error that would have allowed it to be compromised. And once he figured that out, they made his life miserable. And in addition to him, after he left, Iran found out that by saying something to one of their embassies and then the CIA acting upon that information, and the only place it went out was through that crypto AG equipment, they figured out that it was compromised. And the next time the salesman came into the country, they kidnapped him. They arrested him. And they made the CIA pay $1 million to get him out of jail. And then Crypto AG tried to bill him for the $1 million to make him pay it back, even though they were the ones responsible for his spending time in prison in Iran, which is not a pleasant experience, by the way. SR 71.
Thank you, Colonel. I'll take that a step further. Your explanation is really good, and I like your delineation between one being set up for what's truly happening on the ground and the other being set up for governmental operations, if you want to look at it that way. But and that's true. But what I'll add to this is the bigger problem today, and our intelligence community has a huge problem with it, is crypto has been let out of the bag for the general public. Okay, and the general public is capable of using all manner of means of encrypting their own messages, encrypting their own hard drives, encrypting everything that goes on that only they can share. There is no backdoor to it. And that's what they're really complaining about today. Well, we can't get into your phone. We can't get this. We can't get that. We don't have this. We don't have that. Well, the cat's out of the bag. The public decided they were going to do it on their own. So it's no longer the government that does this. And you'll find out, and I wouldn't be surprised to find out that you also have nefarious characters that have their own crypto that's going to make things difficult for the rest of us. Thank you, Colonel.
Sure. Well, let me caveat what you just said. There are government back doors in to some of these companies, and I would venture to say AT&T is one of them. And just like with ITT, its predecessor, who shared all of their information, even without asking, with the government, that just like with Facebook and the old Twitter and Google, who share all of our information, they don't necessarily need a back door anymore. They actually created, through DARPA, they create Facebook, and then they pretend that this kid in a garage did it. The entire Facebook is crypto AG, as far as I'm concerned. And the government has CIA and FBI people in the headquarters at Facebook that view everything that we say and do. So they don't need to thwart encryption. They're part of the system because they built the system. They just went about it in a and that's not unlike crypto AG if you look at it. While that guy actually created the encryption technology, he was co-opted from the beginning. He was set up in business from the beginning, not unlike Facebook, not unlike Google. It's again, I come back to every time I think about this, it's like everything in our life is not real. If you could imagine yourself in a hologram, literally everything about your life is not real. The movie industry is not real. The music industry is not real. Your government sure as hell ain't real. Regardless, your phone companies, your social media, none of it is actually what you think it is. None of our history is real. We are walking around in a hologram. Go ahead, Bridget.
That movie, and I know you don't watch movies. The Truman, my brain just went blank. So he's living in, thank you, he's living inside of a giant dome. And what he even thinks is the sky is not the sky, and what he thinks is normal host people. And it's all scripted. It's all a movie. And there's cameras inside everywhere to watch his life and broadcast it for the entertainment of others. That is our world, to some extent. Obviously, we have a real sky and so on and so forth, but it's really, there are so many movies that have been done on exactly that, Into the Matrix. There's so many.
Yeah, that's my impression of all that we've uncovered. It seems like every piece of what I thought our history was, none of it's real. Michael, go ahead.
Even the bad guys are actually the good guys. The good guys
yes.
are the bad guys.
Yeah. Yes.
Flip it upside down, and then you've got the right view. You know.
Yeah, I agree. Michael, go ahead.
Well, what are your thoughts? Because I've been hearing a lot about the whole fact that encryption is pretty much going to be a thing of the past due to AI, and that they're already creating AI to handle all encryption. So there goes the ability for security. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I've SR71, did you want to say something about that? He's in the IT business, and then I'll tell you what I've read.
Sure, I can say something about that, Colonel. Really, what the major problem is right now is what people are looking at concerning encryption. It's not AI that's the issue. Because when you decrypt something or try to decrypt something, it's either through brute force or you have an idea of what you're actually going to do and how to get around it, unless you have a back door. Okay? No back door, then it requires some sort of brute force. With quantum computing, that's a different story. Okay, once quantum computing comes in, any encryption you have, quantum computing will, today's encryption technology, quantum computing will decrypt it in no time flat. It really will. Although there is a way to do encryption using quantum computing that cannot be broke. So all is not lost, but everything previously encrypted would be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that kind of jives with what's interesting about this from a layman's standpoint is we're going to incrementally go back and forth between privacy and no privacy, privacy and no privacy, as we have seen to date, where, you know, in the 50s, before the party line telephone, you had basically your own privacy because you didn't have a telephone. And then you got party line telephones where you didn't have privacy and everybody, all your neighbors could listen to everything you said. And then we went to single lines, which was privacy again. And I just see this going back and forth where we had computers, even though they weren't encrypted, nobody had access to them. And then everybody had access to them and we created encryption. And so there just seems to be there is always going to be a desire for us to be independent in America, which is why we drive technology. And then there's always going to be a desire for the government to not allow us to be independent. And so to me, there's always going to be this back and forth that every time they thwart our independence, we're going to get it back. So anyway, anybody else?
Colonel, I posted in the bill a deal from Wiki and quantum cryptography, if anybody wants to take a look at it. It's fairly good at explaining what I try to get across.
Got it. Thank you. All right.
Can I say I am so glad we are a team? I know we say it a lot, but everything from the questions you guys ask help us learn more, help us focus in different new directions. And the posts, the tags you guys do absolutely help in the general and overall learning of this curve. And you know, the stellar is all about the crypto, and there's a lot of other ones that come in, and it really, you know,
They all connect.
absolutely. Marie, she was here earlier. I mean, you know, in her with the biological. I mean, this is, you know, like the Colonel often points out, spokes in the wheel. You know, it is not one simple, and that's why the Truman Show was such a, you know, or if you like the Matrix or all of these, it's not just one thing that was a lie. But once you get past that first big swallow of, wow, if they can lie about this, then they can lie about anything. Down is up. It starts to make you rethink everything, where if they say it's harmful to you, you may want to dig into it a little.
It's like cursing's probably a good thing, you know. Cursing's probably a high vibrational thing, and they don't want us doing it. I'm joking. Well, it's like Stargate, you know, that show Stargate. I totally think that's like totally true. So sorry. Hey, Carrie.
Hey, yeah, I'm just wondering if SR 71 knows about Bill Binney. And I just wanted to say also that any government that doesn't want the people of this landmass to be free isn't the American government. That's not our government. Nothing to do with us.
I'm sorry, what was that question again? Know anything about what?
Bill Benny.
No, doesn't ring a bell. Thank you.
Okay. Miles, did you have something?
Well, I know who he is, and I know what he did.
Right.
I think so. What's the question about him?
She just wanted to know if SR 71 knew who he was.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Trump Frog, did you have anything coming up that you wanted to talk about? When's your next show? Do you have one scheduled?
The only ones that he seems to have scheduled are yours now. He works a lot, so
Okay.
Just whenever you're on, unless he does something pop up, and
Okay.
I'll make sure I repost it to everybody.
All right. That sounds good.
And if you don't mind, I do want to say one thing. Last night was insane. They have been attacking, okay, for all those, and I know you don't like to whine about it, but I'm going to just give one little whine. They've been attacking Colonel Page, posts, faces, everything. And so if you notice differences in the titles of things and differences, we are trying to tweak and get around and break the algorithm. And even last night in Froggy's face, it went down, 4 times before you guys finally got it to get up and stay open?
I had to open it up under my name to have it stay open. When he opened it, he couldn't even hear that we were talking. And he's like, hello, Stellar, Colonel Towner. We're
Right.
all laughing in the background. He couldn't hear any of us.
Right.
And it is a coordinated effort. So that's why you don't see Operation Gladio in the title. You know, we may find other ways to get around it. But, you know, we're just going to roll with it, and we're going to break their matrix.
Yeah.
I kind of like the Glad Ops, you know.
Yeah.
I just didn't realize it was for the gay lesbians, but I think Glad Ops is pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. So that, yeah, we're, oh, and that reminds me, you guys saw me playing with the, a couple of the different apps to use to post my threads. Well, one of them worked for, one won't work at all. The other one worked for 3 threads, and then the other 2 would not go through, and I had to go back to doing them manually. And then when I started to post those 500 CIA front companies, neither one of them would work. And I honestly believe that's because of the content that we're posting.
Coincidence, I'm sure.
So I'm going to test that out by posting to both of them, because I opened accounts in both of them to test them, and I'm going to do something. It'll still be along the Gladio lines, but not using the word Gladio, and not necessarily using the word CIA in it either. And I'm going to see if both of those will allow me to do just kind of a background post on, you know, an organization like the American Security Council or whatever, and see if I can get away with that. And then we'll know. So we are still looking, if you guys know anybody that is kind of a system app kind of person that does like, threads and stuff like that, that you can ask. We are looking for one because, like Bridget said, there's several of them out there, and you just have to read what the attributes are. The one that we love the attributes is called CHIRR app. CHIRR app. It has all of the attributes that we like. It allows you to number posts. You can just put everything in a block of information, and then it kind of ferrets it out into the individual posts. The other one that I had was like Thread Reader, and you have to actually like hit return in order for it to break for the next post. And if you don't hit return it does, even if you have a premium account, it doesn't allow you to make longer than the normal 280 characters. So if it automatically breaks it up, it's much better. So I don't have to go and try to guess at where I can hit the return button to make the new post. And so those are the two big things. It automatically breaks it up, and it allows you to number. And
you can insert pictures with links.
Yeah.
Original learning, that kind of stuff.
I don't really do a lot of pictures, so that wouldn't be my number one criteria. Right. If we can do that, that's fine. But those two things of it automatically breaking it up for me and allowing me to number them is like the two most important things. Michael, go ahead.
And I don't know if you've covered this in the past or not, but I was just kind of wondering because of what you were just talking about as far as what you can and can't do here on X. And my question is are there, let's say, CIA and or a backdoor or currently working for X that is monitoring and regulating?
We think that there is some old code that is still in there, that's the reason why they do updates like every 2 or 3 days as they are weeding their way through all of that. So I don't believe there's active. I mean, obviously they're going to try. That's what they do. They're paid to try. I don't think that they're knowingly doing it like they did in the past. Miles, go ahead.
Yeah, here's a question for you. I don't have a blue check, but I can utilize Grok now. I don't know if that's just temporary or long term. But my question is, we know that Grok scrapes X for information, and you were talking about the other day, putting out as much information on the books and Gladio. Are the algorithms going to affect Grok if he talks about Gladio? And if not, can we, for homework, can we just have a ton of people just start asking questions about Gladio from Grok?
That's a great question, Miles. Yeah, because I don't know if you saw the recent post like an hour ago or 2 hours ago by Elon Musk saying that we don't need hashtags anymore. And that basically they're going to, Bridget has suggested this in the past, that things that she's read, they were going to start prioritizing posts that do use them, because now they have AI built into the code. So if you do a search on Gladio, you don't need the hashtag anymore. It's just going to show you all of the information anyway. And so we will probably not be doing the hashtag anymore. But I think the way around that is to do exactly what Miles just said. That's a great idea, is asking. As a matter of fact, I think Bridget several months ago actually did do that, and it brought up several of my posts. But we also found other people talking about it, which was kind of a good thing. Yeah, I highly suggest you guys do that. And I would love to see if you guys, because if you have Grok, you can ask that question, and you can then do an out arrow and tag me in the post so I can see what Grok said. So that can be a great action item for our homework assignment. Thanks to Miles, you guys can all thank him. If you have access to Grok, go ask Grok a question about Operation Gladio. It can be something you already know, just ask him. And I really am committed to putting as much information as I can into at least a thread a day, a fairly extensive one about information that are in the current books that I'm reading, so that we can get as much of this information built out. So if somebody goes in and says, hey, Grok, did the Vatican ever money launder? You know, like somebody is in our spaces and they hear me say for the first time that the Vatican was money laundering, and they're like, what the hell? Like I did the first time I heard it, and or read it actually in Paul Williams' book. And I want Grok to be able to go, yeah, they did that. And we're going to give them the material to do it with. Carrie, go ahead.
Right, because it is a learning program. So the more we ask it, the more it learns.
Correct. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Miles. That's really beautiful. The thing about backdoors is I'm like internet activist long time, and my knowledge is that they won't really allow anything without a backdoor. Not possible.
Miles?
Well, yeah, I'm going into my memory banks as an old man trying to remember the timeline on this. I think after Trump went to the Vatican, I'm trying to remember when I saw a story that the Vatican, it wasn't that much longer after that the Vatican was asking for parishes to send money to the Vatican.
Well, and did you see that article they just posted saying they're broke?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
But I knew they weren't broke at that time, when Trump went to go visit the Pope. But it wasn't that much longer after that it was a big news thing that all the parishes had to send money to the Vatican ASAP.
And, I think we were talking about this just recently. When you take down the Nostris mafia in Italy, that was kind of the kingpins of the drug trade, and they're no longer getting their skim off the top of laundered money, it does put a crimp in your budget. Not to mention, molesting kids and stuff like that, and then not holding people accountable. That kind of puts a crimp in your budget too. So they've not done themselves any favors, that's for sure. And really, that's unfortunate, because I think the whole purpose of much of Operation Gladio is to compromise as much of our cultural identity as possible, and that, the Catholic Church becomes a target. All of the Protestant churches have been targeted by the Rockefellers, as I had outlined, and using missionaries as intelligence informants. And they were using the language translators that went into these villages in South America as basically reconnaissance. And once they found tribes, they went in and massacred the tribes. And so these evil bastards have done so much to destroy our cultural heritage, that I'm going to be extra diligent in my pursuit of revealing the information that basically outs all of their attempts to do just that, because we owe it to ourselves not to abandon our culture. And that's one of the things Brian Cates kind of emphasizes routinely that the whole infiltration of our sports, which for the Americans culture, we have always embraced sports. It's part of our culture, just like soccer is part of European culture. And when they began the attempt to add wokeness to every aspect of our sport enthusiasm towards whatever sport you happen to like, whether it was NASCAR or football. Brian had originally kind of bought into that, and then he got pissed off and he was like, no, I'm not leaving. I'm not abandoning my culture because someone else has tried to destroy it. And he's very articulate, as you guys all know, and he began posting post after post after post. And, in my opinion, especially over on True Social, when he got into this kick, he single-handedly basically kind of turned everybody around going, yeah, you're right. Because when he first did that, they were like, no, I'm still not ever going to watch it. And every once in a while, you'll still hear somebody, go, oh, yeah, I've not watched football in forever. Well, then you're a quitter. You are allowing somebody, if you enjoyed it, I'm not suggesting if you didn't enjoy it that you need to go start watching it or anything. But if you are a sports enthusiast, and I basically really struggled with this because the one thing that I had in common with my dad and our one kind of overarching, and I'm a daddy's girl, growing up I was my dad's shadow the entire time. He's what gave me my love for anything mechanical. And sitting on Sundays watching football with my dad was a memory that will be with me for all of my life. And I don't know if I ever told you guys the story of so I call my dad, except for the time that I was in Italy, I call him every Wednesday night and every Sunday, sometime during Sunday. If it's NASCAR season, and my dad knew every single thing about everything NASCAR. And I mean, every statistic, he had a racetrack on their farm, a dirt racetrack, stock car races that he built and made money from growing up in central Indiana. My dad knew everything about NASCAR, every single thing. So he was also a college basketball. He didn't care about professional basketball at all, but college basketball, he knew every statistic. My mom's, I think it ended up being a great uncle, was Coach Wooden out at UCLA. My mom's maiden name is Wooden. They were related. And my dad knew everything. He is from Indiana, and my marketing, I graduated from Indiana University. My first day at college, my first class was marketing. And he had everybody introduce themselves, and I kind of, said my little spiel of growing up in Florida, but my family was originally from Indiana. And my dad was a huge IU fan. He goes, yeah, he says, we have two sports at Indiana. And I'm looking at him going, you got a lot more than two. And he says, we have basketball and basketball practice. And that literally was the way IU ran its ship. This year was the first time they'd had a football team in I don't know, probably, well, I do know in 1988, I believe it was, they almost went to the Rose Bowl because that was my first year out in Los Angeles. And I was thinking, oh my God, they hadn't been to the Rose Bowl in forever. And I was going to get to see them in the Rose Bowl for the first time ever because I was stationed in Los Angeles. They didn't make it. Michigan at the last minute, or Michigan State, one of the two, ended up coming out. So anyway, big basketball fan. So I talk to my dad all the time. So by osmosis, I know a little bit about college basketball and I know a little bit about football. When I got assigned to the Pentagon, we had the Sweet 16 or the the March Madness betting pool.
Brackets.
Brackets.
You have the brackets.
Okay, so I work in an office that had probably about 10 guys and, you know, probably about 5 females. And I sit in an area that I was surrounded by the guys. So they're all doing their March Madness bracket. And so one of them, I hear him whispering, because we're in cubicles in the basement of the Pentagon. And I hear him whispering, going, yeah, you can get her money, because I was brand new over there. And he's like, yeah, we can take her money. Go get her to, because I would talk about sports a little bit. So they knew that I like sports. So I had one of them come up to me and go, hey, you want to get in the brackets? And I'm like, sure. So I took my sheet home that night and I called my dad. We walked through the whole brackets and I turned it in the next day with my money. And as each day goes by, they're like, son of a bitch, she's still in it. Son of a bitch, she's still in it. And we're down to the final 4. And they're like, it's me and 2 guys. I won the pool. And the guys, the next day after the final game, the championship game, I came in and I'm like, so did I win or did I not win? And they're like, you won. How the hell did you win? And I said, well, and all of us worked in personnel. So we all have access to the personnel database. We could find out anything about anybody in the entire Air Force. And I said, you guys suck. I said, if any of you guys had taken 5 seconds and looked at where I graduated college, you'd have known I was going to kick your ass. Because in Indiana, they have 2 sports, basketball and basketball practice. And I'll kick your ass next year too. So.
By the way, Colonel, they still only have 2 sports. Just kidding. But
yes, they still do.
I think it's amazing that you're related to John Wooden. If people don't know, he's one of the greatest coaches recognized across any sport of all time.
Correct.
So John Wooden is a legend.
Correct.
Yeah, Larry Bird was who I grew up idolizing.
Well,
from Indiana.
French Lick, Indiana, by the way. And he was.
I'm well aware. I got a piece of the parquet floor. I'm.
Okay.
That was my sport growing up. I'm a fanatic. I've met Bobby Knight a few times. A little bit of a hothead, but I like competitive people.
So my dad in his office had his favorite picture of me of all times was not me getting promoted, not me getting commissioned, not me getting promoted to lieutenant colonel, not me getting promoted to colonel. It was my picture with Bobby Knight, because Bobby Knight started his career at West Point, and he spent 5 years there before he moved to Indiana University. And he went, he knew all of, by the time I came around, it had been a long time. And most of the people that he taught at West Point were all Army generals. And he'd go golfing with Army generals, 4 stars all the time. And he loved the military. And so there were 2, the Army had ROTC there and the Air Force had ROTC at Indiana University in Bloomington. And every semester, Bobby Knight came to what was referred to as a 1-hour-a-week leadership lab. And he would sit down and talk with us. And he would share with us his leadership principles. And, tell stories about the Army generals that he hung around with and stuff like that, which was really, really cool. And our ROTC detachments also ushered all of the home basketball games to make money for our banquets and stuff like that. And so there was a very close relationship with the ROTC detachments there and Bobby Knight at Indiana University, at least when I was there. And so he's just a really neat guy. And anyway, yeah.
Small world, since you know basketball. One of the people, the coaches that I got to know the best when I worked at Nike was Steve Alford. And that was when he coached at Southwest Missouri State, and then he went to Iowa and coached at the Hawkeyes. He sent me Hawkeyes gear, and I sent it back to him.
And what year did he graduate Indiana University? 1987, because that's the year we went and won the NCAA championship, and that's the year I graduated. So
He's
I
the
was,
he's the greatest Hoosier, in my opinion, of all time.
so I was there the entire time Steve Alford played.
He was nasty. I played ball with him at Nike at the world headquarters. That guy could really ball.
So
he was, even as a coach, he had games still.
So here's the funny story. You know where he got drafted at first?
Now you're asking me to go back to my memory while I'm driving, but give me a minute. But go ahead and answer.
Okay,
I love Steve Alford.
He went to Dallas, and he didn't get to play all that often. But I was down in Dallas Fort Worth I graduated in May. I went back on active duty for training as a lieutenant after I graduated from IU in October. And so between May and October, I had a job at the A&P school at Love Field in Dallas, Texas. And so I was able to go to his very first Dallas Maverick game.
That's awesome. I got a great story for you too, just real quick. So when, obviously I love hoops and got to meet all these coaches and stuff, and I worked at the Nike employee store, and I asked him, I said, what happened when you were in the NBA? And he literally said, he goes, you know what? He goes, it's demon spawn there. He goes, I didn't like the lifestyle of the NBA. He goes, he quit because he really didn't want to go out and drink and party and womanize and do all of that stuff, because he's deeply Christian.
Yes, he is.
Deeply Christian. I was like, oh, you're my dude then. But yeah, so Steve Alford, baby. That's small world about John Wooden. That's the coolest thing I've heard in a long time.
So my aunt, my mom, like I said, her maiden name's Wooden. So my Uncle Paul Wooden, they're from Noblesville, Indiana, which is just outside of Indianapolis. She did all of their genealogy, and she's the one that found that. And so I think it was my grandpa is cousins with John Wooden's dad. And so she took the whole genealogy chart, and this is back before, this is like in the 80s. So there's no computers, there's nothing. It's all her handwritten work. She made copies of everything, taped it all together, folded it up, and mailed it to him. And he's originally from the Kentucky/Indiana area. His family is, because obviously they're the same family as my mom, and my mom was born in Kentucky, and then they all moved up to Indiana. And so she mailed it to him, and she had in her genealogy box, when she passed away, the letter from him thanking her for sending it to him.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So very, very cool. But yeah. Anyway, I had to go over to look at, obviously I knew who he was. I knew all about the legend. And so when I was stationed out in Los Angeles, I went over there because they've got like a shrine to him there. And yeah. And so it was just really cool. I'm related to him.
That's really, really cool. Yeah, because basketball was my passion growing up, and then I got to golf, and obviously that changed. But I like what you said about sports. I hear this all the time: bread and circus, bread and circus. Well, yeah, the NFL is completely rigged. So yeah, if you can't understand that going on, but if you're passionate about your college team that you went to school, there's a lot of family stuff that goes on with that. I live for college football. It's like my most passionate thing. And I like college basketball. I hate pro sports. But people that like it, good for you. Do what you want. But it's completely rigged.
So
you see LeBron James is retiring, by the way?
Yes.
Gladio.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So let me also say this. When I moved to the Midwest, my first duty station was Illinois, and then I moved over to Indiana, and then I got accepted to Indiana University and went to school full time there. I remember calling my dad because, again, I'd watched for, my entire childhood. I knew all of the college teams. I knew in basketball. And so I know growing up in Florida, basketball, we didn't have a pro team, and basketball in high school, because everything's football in Florida, everything. And you may have had 50 people at a basketball game in Florida at high school, like no one went. And so I remember the first time being in the Midwest, and it was like on, I don't know, like a Friday night, and I'm flipping through the channels, and I see this big auditorium. And I mean, there's probably 20,000 people in this auditorium, and there's some crazy team, like something squirrels or something, some name I've never heard of. And I'm like, what the hell is that? That's not a college team. So I pick up the phone and I call my dad. And I'm like, who the hell is these people? And I said, is this a college team that just is like a low level one or somebody we've never heard of? And he started laughing so loud on the phone. He goes, because it was an Indiana team. And he goes, Roxanne, that's a high school team. What are you talking about? And I'm like, that can't be a high school team. And he goes, it's a high school team. This time of year, they're having playoffs up there. That's a high school team. They normally make it to the Indiana State Championship. And I was just dumbfounded. I'm like, are you telling me that I'm looking at a high school game and there's 25,000 people watching a high school game? And he goes, oh yeah, that's not unusual up there at all. And I was just sitting in shock compared to my 50 people in a big gym in Florida compared to 25,000 in the state of Indiana, because everything in Indiana, it's like Florida and Texas is everything football. The Midwest is everything basketball. And I was just dumbfounded by that. So, yeah.
I have my reason why, and I'm not going to say it because I want to keep my account. But the Basketball Hall of Fame is in Indiana, and when I resigned from Nike and drove across the country, we stopped there. I had to because I definitely wanted to go and check that out. So, yeah, Indiana is basketball country.
It definitely 100%. Is. And I heard right out of Bobby Knight's mouth the story about Larry Bird and how he recruited him, but he was a ball hog. And Bobby Knight's basketball style is you play as a team. There's not going to be any ball hogs on his team. And he kept trying to work with Larry Bird, and Larry Bird was like, no, I'm the star. And he ended up going to Southern, huh?
He went to Indiana State.
Indiana State and
beat Indiana and won the national championship.
Yes, he did.
And is one of the most unselfish players that ever played in the NBA, which is so funny.
Which he was not when he was at Indiana State.
No, I got you.
Yeah, he was definitely, but no one played at his caliber either. And for him, it would have been like dumbing down his game. And he just was not going to do that. And he basically and Bobby Knight said this. He basically single-handedly beat Bobby Knight's team. And he was very proud of him doing that. But Bobby Knight's leadership, and that was his lesson for that time that he came over, he was not changing the way he coached for a single player. And if it meant losing the talent, he would lose the talent. He is not changing his leadership style, and neither should any of us. And that was his lesson for all of us going on to be officers, is you don't change your leadership style because you have somebody, either good or bad, working for you. You are who you are, you be who you are, and then everything else kind of plays out. And obviously, Bobby Knight is as big a legend as Larry Bird in that space. And they both have their own unique things, but it is a funny story.
That really is. When you said that, I'm like, he is like the ultimate team player, and he's the most competitive human being on the planet. Like Michael Jordan.
And
it's funny how he changed this game, apparently.
And I think
that was my hero growing up.
And I think, and Bobby Knight said they maintained a relationship through that whole time. So I think as Larry Bird, and obviously even at IU, where there was extremely talented people on the team when he was there, he was just leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of them. And I think once he got into the pros, he was surrounded by more talent and therefore able to be the big team player. And anyway, I love all of those stories. Miles, go ahead.
Wow, we kind of went around in circles. I'm trying to remember why I raised my hand. Oh yeah, I remember. But just on the basketball side, I was dating a girl a long time ago. Do you remember the ABA?
No.
Yeah, that was the American Basketball Association. Kareem started there, so I got free tickets. We used to go there and watch the ABA. They had a goofy basketball. It was a striped basketball. I think it was blue and white. But
I did not do any pro basketball until my dad started watching the Orlando Magic once they got a basketball team. And then again, just so I can have conversations with my dad, I started watching professional basketball that would have played during that week in order to have something. And only Magic, because that was the only team he watched. So I knew something about the Magic game if they played that week. So I had something to talk to my dad about.
Yeah, they were called the Minnesota Pipers. But as far as your dad goes, yeah, my dad was an entrepreneur. So this was, I think, around 1978. He was working with NASCAR and Formula One drivers doing PR work for them. So he said, well, I'm flying a small plane to Michigan 400. And if you want to come, you can't come on the plane, but you can drive out there. So I drove out there in a Chevelle SS, and then I was in the pits. I had a pit pass. Well, one of the guys didn't show with one of the drivers that he was promoting. And this guy was from Minnesota. He owned a concrete company, and he would like run in the top 10 and then blow his engine almost every race. So, because he just didn't have the mechanics and stuff and the money. So I was asked to be in the pits to refuel that car. And I was so nervous because you remember what they used to have, those huge containers where you had to lift it over your head and stick it into, the back of the car.
Yeah.
Well, luckily he blew his engine before he had to gas up. So I just stood, I spent the rest of the race in the pits. But the reason I rose my hand was about the rebel gene, because during COVID, we were doing Zoom calls with people that were like, what is going on? This is stupid. It's the dumbest psyops we've ever seen, during the lockdowns. And one night, we did them every Wednesday night. So one night we were talking about our lineage. And it turns out all the 10 people there, we had the rebel gene. And it went all the way back to the Revolutionary War. We had a couple twins that their relatives actually had the Durham boats that helped Washington go across the river, the Delaware. So, and a lot of people don't realize that the cod fishermen really played a big role in moving the troops around in their boats during the Revolutionary War. So yeah, it's the same thing here. We got a lot of rebels. We're just not going to comply. Thanks, Colonel.
Sure. Yeah, something weird just happened on my Rumble thing. I can see I'm still live, but on the actual studio version of it, the screen just went black while you were talking. That's weird. So I had to log in to see if it's still going for everybody else. Hopefully I will be able to log out of that. Who knows? Okay, so I got to run. Thanks everybody for being here and helping me relive some of my wonderful memories. That the moral of the whole story of talking about sports is that was for decades and decades my connection to my dad, and I will never, ever give it up. That is everything about that is my dad. And that's how I remember my dad. And so every time I sit and watch a football game, my dad is with me every time I watch a college basketball game. My dad is with me, and no one is ever going to take that away from me because I am a daddy's girl, and I will be until the day I die. So there. Anyway, thanks for being here.
I'm right there with you, Colonel Towner.
Thank you. All right. And so tonight I am going to be on the missing link at 8:00. And I will, I posted yesterday all of the links to find it. And tomorrow we'll be on at 4, and then I'll be on Alpha Warrior tomorrow night at 9:30. Hopefully finishing our segment on the World Anti-Communist League. We're basically going to go into its presence in the United States, and it is shocking to know the extent to which both our military, our government, and other unsavory people were part of a terrorist organization called the World Anti-Communist League inside the United States, and all of the different pieces that went along with that. And then again, at 11:30 on Thursday, we're going to have Ryan Mata on a Rumble podcast talking about the Guatemalan child trafficking investigation into with the attorney general down there, the president, and the U.S. government. So that's kind of a tentative lineup for the rest of the week. And we will also, after we finish with Ryan, we will do our Secret Society with War Hamster, which is going to be rescheduled to about 1:30 for a continuation of that. And then we'll do the 4:00, and off we go. Then we'll have Isabella back at 4:00 on Friday for a special. So see you guys tomorrow or tonight if you make the Missing Link show. See you later. Bye. All right, let me get this figured out. See if I can get back in here. If I can refresh